In this video, we're going to be talking about angiosperms and gymnosperms. So, both are vascular plants, but before we get into the similarities and differences, let's look at each of these different cycles. So first, let's start with angiosperms. Like 80% of the plants are angiosperms. The main difference from angiosperms and gymnosperms is that angiosperms have flowers. So in the reproductive system for a plant, basically, it's the flower that attracts the bug to be able to give pollen to it. And as we looked over here, the female part of an angiosperm, the pollen is given to the top part of this carpel, also known as a stigma, and the stigma is the one that receives the pollen, and then the ovules are and it gives to the ovary. This ovary gives it to the ovules, and the ovules produce seeds when they get pollinated. So when the ovules produce seeds, when they get pollinated, the entire ovary turns into a fruit, and this fruit is either eaten by an animal, and then the seeds come out as droppings in a different location, or gravity pulls the thing down, and that starts a new plant. So that's basically the reproductive system for how an angiosperm works. An example of this would be a tomato. You can see that the seeds are enclosed and they're very much protected outside by the fruit, or in this situation, it would be a vegetable. But anyway, that's the reproductive system of a angiosperm. Now let's move on to a gymnosperm. So a gymnosperm, unlike the angiosperms, they don't have a flower, and because they don't have a flower, how do you think they'll be able to attract insects? Well, they don't. They heavily have to rely on wind. Unlike a flower, which has a male and female part, there's one plant that's a male, but the other plant could be a female. But whatever it is, the male plant will be stacked with pollen by the time spring season comes. And when spring season comes, and when it's stacked with pollen, all that pollen is released through the wind. And when it's released through the wind, it enters into the little holes of this pot. In the pine, in the female part, they enter through little holes called ovules, like we see over here, ovules. And when they enter into those little holes, then they pollinate. And using the pollen, they pollinate, and then they open up, and these seeds form out. And basically, instead of insects, they have to rely on animals like squirrels who use it, or birds who use it, or they have to rely on gravity, where it pulls the seeds down, and they grow up into bigger trees or plants. So this is another example. So another thing with that is gymnosperms, unlike how it was over here, it was like very enclosed and very protective. Here, the seeds just lay out in the open. So for fun fact, angiosperms, angio meaning enclosed and sperms meaning seeds, and gymnosperms, gymno being naked and sperms being seeds. So basically, angiosperms have enclosed seeds, so they make their seeds very protected based on the ovary, using the ovules for seeds. But over here for gymnosperms, they don't have an ovary. Instead, they just use ovules. So so basically the seed is not protected by any outer layer. It is just out in the open, either waiting to be picked up by the wind or to be dropped to the ground. When we look at angiosperms and we look at flowers, we obviously see that they have flowers, which is the one that helps attract insects to get pollen. But as I explained over here with gymnosperms, they don't have flowers. Meanwhile, let's compare it with seeds. As I also showed, seeds are enclosed through this ovary, but over here, they don't have an ovary, they're just ovules, or just a bunch of seeds that eventually get picked up by the wind or drop down. So next, let's look at leaves. So for a plant, when we look at the sepals, we see that they are nice. They're just broad, but sometimes, and they're also very flat. We can see they're flat and broad. But when we compare it to gymnosperms, the leaves are needle-like. So what I mean by needle-like is that they have like these pointy tips, and these pointy tips is to protect it against animals who want to eat the seeds early. Example, pine country, or these type of leaves over here, they're very sharp. All right, and next for pollination, like I said, for these ones, they use animals, but these guys, they use the male plant to be that where the pollen gets carried by the wind into the female plant. Then fruit is formed over here, or vegetables in this situation, but no fruit is formed over here. Now, the thing with a life cycle is that These guys survive in either cold or dry seasons, but these guys survive in temperate or warm or tropical seasons. And also, when we look at basically their basic anatomy, these guys can survive for a very long time, but the gymnosperms can survive for a very long time. And the thing is that they, like, instead of like using their nutrients all the time, like these guys store their nutrients, so they're able to live during the winter and remain dormant during that time. Most of the angiosperm plants are bisexual, but gymnosperms are unisexual, and I can explain it. So basically, in a plant, there's the male and female part, but for gymnosperms, there's one separate male plant and there's one separate female plant. In summary or in conclusion, the main difference between angiosperms and gymnosperms are that angiosperms, they have enclosed seeds, or their seeds are much more protected according to the name, and for gymnosperms, their seeds are not that protected, they're more out in the open, like as the name suggests. Also, most angiosperms are bisexual, but gymnosperms are unisexual. Some of the angiosperms can also be unisexual sometimes. And compared for angiosperms live in a much more tropical climate compared to gymnosperms, who live in a much more colder or drier climate. Most important difference is angiosperms have flowers, but gymnosperms don't have flowers. So when looking at it, their reproductive systems would obviously be different, because angiosperms, they use flowers and they rely on insects to be able to receive pollen, but gymnosperms rely on the wind, so the pollen from the male plants can be delivered to the female plants, so the ovules can use it to be able to produce seeds.